I'm just hoping the next sequel in this series explains how the Insidious movies connect to the Star Wars universe, and finally answer the question how Darth Maul went from a great lightsaber fighter to just a weird pedophile.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Insidious Chapter 2 is one of those sequels that starts up right where the first movie left off. After a certain tragedy took place at the end of the first movie, this film follows the same family, and there's some suspicion going around as to whether the dad is who he says he is, or whether he's even the same person. When I heard that they were coming out with a sequel to Insidious, I was very skeptical at first. I wondered how you could even make a sequel after the way that the first film ended. It does end on a cliffhanger, but if they had just stopped there, it would have been perfectly unsettling and terrifying. As it turns out, though, this movie does manage to follow up on the events of the first film in a very intelligent and believable way. Granted, some of the concepts in this movie aren't as original as what you saw in the first film, which I know saying that a sequel is unoriginal is like me telling you that the ceiling is white. Nothing gets past me, does it? By the way, did you also know that the shelves behind me are decorated for Halloween? It's crazy. This thing has a red nose. What I mean by that, though, is that whereas the previous film introduced these unique concepts of astral projection and a person being haunted instead of a house, the second movie, spoiler alert, concludes with the dad going crazy, which is something that we've seen before in movies like The Shining and the Amityville Horror, and a movie I'd like to forget about called Darkness. However, it is a trope that's done very well in this movie, I think, and it's a concept that never stops being scary. I've mentioned before how terrifying I think it would be for someone who I love very dearly to suddenly not be themselves anymore, or even for me to become someone else, to not be in control of my own body, to have another mind in there. That's just unsettling as hell. And even though Darth Maul doesn't come back in this movie, I do like how they delve deeper into the backstory of the Bride in Black. Her tale is very chilling and disturbing, and I wouldn't be surprised if they had taken inspiration from Ed Gein. This film also does something which a lot of sequels should do, in that it allows you to learn more about the world in which it takes place. You get to learn more about the Further and how it works. And there are no sloppy exposition dumps or anything like that. It is very easy to grasp and genuinely interesting. Now, I might start to sound repetitive at this point, but as is the case with Hostel Part 2, one thing about this movie that you're either going to love or hate is that it features a couple of characters in it who offer comedic relief. And I can see how some people would consider them to be a little bit over the top, but for me, they never felt jarring or distracting. They never really took away from the horror of the movie. Let's put it this way, there's never a point where somebody gets decapitated and they start kicking it around like a soccer ball. That would have been just a little bit out of place. Plus, the studio wouldn't have been able to make some of that sweet PG-13 money. And I do realize there are people out there who believe that there's no such thing as PG-13 horror, but sometimes you don't need an R rating to get certain scary concepts across. You don't need to have blood or boobs or bloody boobs to get a scare out of people. In the end, Insidious Chapter 2 is a very effective ghost story, and in my opinion, it's just as scary as the first film. If you haven't seen the first movie yet, it is one of those sequels where you have to watch that first. just to get an idea of what's going on. So if you haven't, then I would definitely recommend checking both of these movies out, watching them back to back. You can skip the third movie though, that would be fine. And that's all I've got to say about this movie. I hope you all have a good one.